The hum of conversation and the rhythmic clicking of luggage wheels filled the arrivals terminal at JFK International Airport. Passengers of all backgrounds moved through the brightly lit corridors, some eager to reunite with loved ones, others simply relieved to be off the plane after long-haul flights. Miguel Santos adjusted the strap of his leather carry-on bag, his steps steady as he followed the signs directing passengers toward customs and immigration. He had just arrived from Manila on a grueling 16-hour flight, and though exhaustion tugged at his senses, he kept his posture composed. His navy blue tailored suit remained crisp, and his polished dress shoes reflected the airport's fluorescent lighting. A businessman through and through, Miguel had traveled to the United States dozens of times before, but every trip reminded him of an undeniable truth: perception mattered more than reality. Despite being the CEO of a major tech firm, Miguel had often faced subtle and not-so-subtle skepticism. People underestimated him based on his Filipino heritage, his accent, or even the way he carried himself. Still, he had mastered the art of maintaining dignity in the face of ignorance. As he reached the immigration checkpoint, he handed over his passport to a stone-faced officer. The man barely looked at him before stamping the document and waving him through. That part, at least, had been easy. But things would change at customs. Miguel retrieved his black rolling suitcase from the carousel and was heading toward the exit when he felt eyes on him. A uniformed police officer stood near a group of customs agents, arms folded, eyes locked onto Miguel with unmistakable scrutiny. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried an air of authority that bordered on arrogance. The name on his badge read, Officer Bradley. Miguel sighed internally. Here we go. Bradley exchanged a few hushed words with his colleagues before stepping forward. His heavy boots echoed against the polished floor as he approached. You, he barked, jerking his chin toward Miguel. Step over here. Miguel raised an eyebrow but complied, rolling his suitcase toward the inspection area. Is there a problem, officer? Bradley didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked Miguel up and down as if trying to size him up. Then, in a voice laced with thinly veiled suspicion, he said, We'll see. Open your bag. Miguel suppressed the irritation creeping into his chest. He unzipped his suitcase, revealing neatly packed clothes, a toiletry kit, and a leather notebook filled with business documents. Bradley rifled through Miguel's belongings with deliberate aggression, unfolding shirts, shaking out pouches, even flipping through his personal notebook. Miguel kept his tone neutral. If you're looking for something specific, I can help. Bradley lifted a bottle of cologne, turning it over in his hands like it was contraband. What's this? Miguel blinked. Cologne. A gift. Bradley huffed, placing it down with unnecessary force. He studied Miguel's passport again, eyes narrowing. You travel a lot. Miguel nodded. Yes. My company has international clients. Bradley smirked. Oh yeah? What kind of business are we talking about? Miguel's patience thinned. Software development. My company specializes in cybersecurity and AI integration. A chuckle escaped Bradley's lips. That's so? His tone dripped with doubt. Miguel met his gaze head-on. Yes. The silence stretched. Other passengers were passing through customs quickly. Some barely stopped at all. But Miguel, he was being held up, and he knew exactly why. After a tense moment, Bradley muttered, Step aside. We need to run some checks. Miguel clenched his jaw. Of course. He stood there, waiting, as Bradley and another officer whispered near a computer terminal. He could feel the weight of the stares, the underlying assumption that he didn't belong. Minutes ticked by. Miguel checked his watch. He had a business meeting in just a few hours, and this unnecessary delay was wasting his time. Finally, Bradley returned. He let out an exaggerated sigh, shaking his head. Looks like you're clear. Miguel reached for his suitcase, but Bradley stepped into his path. One more thing, he said, voice low. You people think you can just walk in here like you own the place. Miguel froze. He stared at Bradley, his heartbeat steady but his anger simmering beneath the surface. Excuse me? He asked, his voice calm but dangerously sharp. Bradley smirked. You heard me. Miguel exhaled slowly. "I've been more than cooperative, officer. If we're finished here, I'll be on my way." Bradley's smirk disappeared. His jaw tensed. "You don't get to tell me when we're finished." Then, in a sudden, unprovoked move, Bradley shoved Miguel hard. Miguel stumbled backward, his shoulders slamming against a wall. His suitcase toppled over, and a few passengers nearby gasped in shock. A man instinctively pulled out his phone, recording the scene. Miguel straightened slowly, his expression unreadable. But inside, something had shifted. Bradley had just made a very, very big mistake. And in the next few minutes, he was going to regret it deeply. Miguel barely had time to process what had happened before Officer Bradley stepped closer, his expression smug as he loomed over him. "Resisting, huh?" Bradley sneered, cracking his knuckles. "That's an offense." Miguel straightened his suit jacket, smoothing out the creases where Bradley had shoved him. His muscles tensed, but his expression remained calm. He had spent years in boardrooms negotiating billion-dollar deals. He knew how to handle men who thrived on intimidation. "I did not resist," Miguel said evenly, his voice steady. "And I suggest you think carefully about what you do next." Bradley let out a short, humorless laugh. "Oh, is that right? You suggesting I'm doing something wrong?" Miguel held his gaze. "I'm stating a fact." The crowd around them had started to grow, travelers pausing to watch the escalating confrontation. A few people discreetly held up their phones, recording. Others whispered among themselves, eyes darting between Miguel and Bradley. But Bradley was too caught up in his own power to notice. "You think you're important, huh?" he said, stepping closer. "Walking in here in your fancy suit, talking down to people like me?" Miguel clenched his jaw but didn't break eye contact. He knew exactly what this was. Bradley was the kind of man who saw authority as an excuse to exert control, and now that his authority was being questioned in front of a crowd, he needed to put Miguel in his place. Miguel had seen this before. He wasn't impressed. "Turn around," Bradley snapped. "Hands behind your back." Miguel didn't move. "On what grounds?" Bradley's smirk widened. "Oh, we'll figure that out at the station." That was it. The final confirmation that this had nothing to do with protocol and everything to do with ego and prejudice. Miguel exhaled sharply, his patience wearing thin. "I strongly advise against this," he said, his voice edged with warning. Bradley's smirk faltered for a brief moment, as if sensing something was off. But then he doubled down. "You don't get to advise me, boy," he spat, grabbing Miguel's arm roughly. The gasps from the onlookers were instant. More phones came up to record, the energy in the air shifting dangerously. Miguel felt the pressure of Bradley's grip, his fingers digging into the expensive fabric of his sleeve. But before Bradley could pull out the handcuffs, a sharp, authoritative voice cut through the commotion. "Officer Bradley, stand down now." The weight of those words hit the air like a gunshot. Bradley froze. His fingers slackened, his jaw clenched. Slowly, he turned his head toward the voice. The crowd parted slightly, revealing a tall man in a dark navy suit striding toward them with purpose. His polished shoes clicked against the airport floor with precision. A gold badge gleamed at his hip, the unmistakable insignia of Homeland Security. Two high-ranking airport security officials flanked him, their expressions unreadable. The Homeland Security agent stopped directly in front of Bradley, his expression cold and sharp. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded. Bradley stiffened, his bravado slipping for the first time. "Sir, this man was acting suspiciously. I know exactly what you were doing." The agent cut him off. His eyes flickered to Miguel, then to the watching crowd, then to the phones still recording. "And you just made a very, very serious mistake." Miguel adjusted his suit jacket, his composure fully intact, even as Bradley began to realize the magnitude of his error. Because this wasn't just any passenger he had harassed. This was Miguel Santos, CEO of Estech Innovations, one of the largest cybersecurity firms in Southeast Asia, and a direct business partner of multiple U.S. government agencies. And now, Bradley was about to face the consequences of his arrogance. The sun had barely begun to set over New York when the first video clips of the airport incident went viral. Uploaded by multiple passengers who had witnessed the confrontation, the footage spread like wildfire across social media. Racist cop abuses power, instantly regrets it. Filipino CEO humiliates racist officer at JFK. Justice served. Officer learns a hard lesson after wrongfully detaining man. Hashtags like #JusticeForMiguel, #racial profiling exposed, and #hold them accountable began trending within hours. Millions of views, thousands of comments, and an overwhelming outcry against Officer Bradley's actions dominated online conversations. And Miguel? He wasn't about to let this be just another viral moment. The very next morning, Miguel filed a formal complaint against Officer Bradley with both the Department of Homeland Security and the Port Authority Police. His legal team, backed by his company's resources, ensured that the complaint wouldn't be buried under bureaucratic delays. News outlets picked up the story almost immediately. Major media stations ran segments with the viral footage playing in the background, dissecting every frame. Analysts called it a clear-cut case of racial profiling and abuse of power. Even civil rights organizations issued statements condemning the officer's actions, demanding accountability. With mounting public pressure, an internal investigation was launched within 24 hours. The result? Officer Bradley was officially suspended. But that was only the beginning. As the investigation dug deeper, more complaints against Bradley surfaced. Cases of excessive force, racial bias, and misconduct that had been swept under the rug for years. Now, with the public watching, the department had no choice but to act. 1 week later, Officer Bradley was officially terminated. The press release from the airport authority stated, "Following a thorough investigation, Officer Bradley has been dismissed from his position due to violations of conduct, misuse of authority, and inappropriate behavior toward passengers." Bradley lost his badge, his pension, and his career. His arrogance had cost him everything. 2 weeks after the incident, Miguel once again arrived at JFK International Airport, this time preparing to fly back home to the Philippines. But things were different now. As he walked through security, he wasn't alone. A team of high-ranking airport officials and Homeland Security representatives escorted him personally, ensuring that his departure was smooth and dignified. Some employees recognized him, whispering to one another. A few even approached him to apologize for what had happened. Miguel accepted the gestures with grace, but he knew this wasn't just about him. It was about every person who had ever been mistreated, disrespected, or judged unfairly because of their race or background. And today, he had proven that arrogance and racism never win in the end. As Miguel's flight soared above the city, he took a deep breath, feeling a sense of closure. This wasn't just about one bad cop. It was about the system that allowed people like Bradley to exist unchecked. But change happens when people refuse to stay silent. Miguel had spoken up. The world had listened, and justice had been served. If you believe in accountability, fairness, and the fight against discrimination, share this story.